Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Welcome back to the GSMC Travel Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Emily McDonald, and I'm so excited to be back for another episode today. And today we're going to talk about something that is very important to me, and that is sustainable travel. And sustainability in general is a massively important issue. It is something that I always want to talk about and bring attention to. It is something that I am just constantly trying to get better at in general. I'm trying to really understand sustainability and what it means to be a sustainable person and a sustainable traveler. But before we can completely just dive into sustainability and how to sustainably travel, we really have to talk about the issue of sustainability and the issue that our world has with, damaging the environment. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how you can sustainably travel, resources that you can use. And then I also think it's important, I want to talk a little bit about the sustainable fashion industry and the fashion industry in general, as it is the second largest polluter. And it might seem kind of off topic for a travel podcast, but I promise I will help to loop it back to the travel industry and how it relates and why it is important to the world and to world travel. And so that's going to be the outline of our show today. Just to kind of start off, I want to talk about some general ways to be environmentally conscious. As I mentioned, I've been kind of going on this journey of sustainability in the last year or so, and just kind of really looking at myself and the choices that I make, things as simple as recycling and, paying attention to where my food is coming from, where my clothes are coming from, where my jewelry is coming from, my face products, things like this. I'm doing a lot more questioning, and I think that is helpful. And, I think although I'd been doing that for a long time, I never really looked at travel and how unsustainable most traveling is. And so, this is a conversation that is ongoing, and I'd love to hear opinions of different people on, can you be environmentally conscious and travel at the same time? A lot of work that I've done while traveling has been give back to the earth and has been based off of trying to help the environment. But I have to kind of, think really about the work that I'm doing versus how detrimental my traveling has been. And so these are all things that I fight with, but I really do want to give you, towards the end of the podcast, just some ways that you can sustainably travel, because it is possible. But like I said before that, I just want to go into, the basics. I want to start with generally the issues that we kind of have from the environment, because I think that we need to talk about those before we can talk about sustainable travel. And so the number one most detrimental industry to the environment is energy. It's pretty much petroleum. That's kind of the big issue. The production of energy makes up the biggest industrial contributions to carbon emissions. So 28% of the U.S.'s greenhouse gas contributions are from the energy industry. and 68% of electricity coming from burning fossil fuels. That's mostly coal and natural gas. And that is so almost 70% of electricity is coming from burning those fossil fuels, essentially. We just know that this is a massive industry. We also know that petroleum gas is gonna run out soon, and we are in deep water with that, but that kind of flows into the next one, and it flows into travel, which number 2 is transportation. So, transportation, this includes trucks, cars, boats, planes, trains, any non-human powered or electric mode of getting to point A to point B. This makes up 60% of the contribution. Cars make up 60% of the contributions to this. And that is a huge issue, and that is, pretty much all of travel. And what does transportation run on? Energy, of course. So these kind of tie into each other. And so, the third biggest, industry is, the third biggest contribution is industry. So making up 22% of greenhouse gas emissions is the broad industry, but this pretty much means fashion. And I think the reason why it's counted as number 3 and not number 2 is because some people split energy and transportation and others don't. I usually group them together. And then the fashion industry is 22% of all greenhouse gas emissions, which is insane, and which is why I want to talk about it more often on the show. And I'm going to get much more into why the industry and why the fashion industry is such a massive component to the destruction of our environment. But moving on to number 4, residential, commercial, and institutional sectors. That's, energy used in heating, cooling, general electricity, waste management, homes, businesses, hospitals, schools. That's 9% of greenhouse emissions. So that's like you would be responsible if you are a homeowner, designer, architect, city planner, community activist, any of this. Number 5 is agriculture. I think that's a really common one that we think of, and so this is something that you should think about if you are, or you should be considering your eating habits. And so a lot of livestock contributes to the global carbon dioxide emission. Animals themselves contribute large amounts of methane, which is 10% of the overall emissions, and that's the second largest greenhouse gas. And then number 6, coming in last, is forestry and land management. So basically, this is, forestry in general can actually be really helpful, but it is also being detrimental. So this is a win some, lose some industry. The earth has an ability to reabsorb up to 40% of the human created carbon we're contributing. This tends to happen with land use, forestry, and land management. So although the industry is a huge contributor, there is a huge amount of trees that are helping to absorb CO2, which can be helpful. Anyway, those are the 6 big ones, so I'm going to say it again. Energy and transportation, industry, residential and commercial, institutional sectors, agriculture, and then forestry and land management. So when we come back from our break, I'm going to go over travel, I'm going to go over the environment, and like I said, it's not all bad. I am going to give some advice. I am going to give some ways that you are able to sustainably travel, as well as just try to work on some education. I'm going to give you guys some facts, and so on and so forth, and that is going to be when we come back from the break.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
and we are back from our break. In the first section of this podcast, I talked about why we are talking about sustainability in this episode. I talked about the 6 biggest contributors to greenhouse gas and carbon emissions. I talked about energy, transportation, industry, residential and commercial institutional sectors, agriculture, forestry and land management. And as we know, energy and transportation, the 2 biggest polluters of the world, are essentially where travel comes into. And so that is why I wanted to talk about it on the episode today. So, before I get into specifically, as travelers, how we are kind of damaging the environment, and then also how we can, reverse that and how we can help ourselves to become more sustainable travelers, I think that it's important to kind of, give some specific facts and information that, some of it I knew before, my research for this episode, but a lot of it I learned while I was kind of looking into sustainable, traveling and how to be just a better human for the world and how to give back more. And so I think these are some important facts to be learned. So this says the average American generates about 16 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year, more than triple the global average. So that's us as American citizens, what we are doing. 16 metric tons of carbon dioxide a year, that's more than triple the global average. And the average American causes, this is a little bit difficult to follow, but really important to understand. The average American causes, through his or her greenhouse gas emissions, the serious suffering and or death of 2 future people. So I just want to read that one more time to clear it up. The average American causes, through his or her greenhouse gas emissions, the serious suffering and or deaths of 2 future people. And so it can be difficult at times to be able to move on in a way, because I know for me, just on a personal level, I hear things like this. I want to change. I want to, make all these drastic changes, but it's also not that easy. And sometimes making changes are expensive, and sometimes making changes means that you have to give up a lot of what you are comfortable with, and that's not always easy, and that's not always possible for a lot of people. And so oftentimes I get discouraged, but I'm hoping, to really press the issue of making small changes and what that can mean. And if you're a person who loves to travel like I do, and my life feels so full whenever I get to travel, and that's something I would never want to give up, I don't need to up and stop traveling necessarily, although maybe that is the best thing for the earth. If I am not willing to do that, what am I willing to do? If I'm a lover of fashion, as I am, and I'm not willing to never buy new clothes again, what can I do that is smaller changes? What can I do in my life to make changes in my closet, to make changes when I'm purchasing stores? Where do I want to put my money to? I think is a really big question that I think needs to be answered, and something that we need to be more careful about as we move on. And that is something I want to get to when we talk about sustainable fashion. But right now, I wanted to read a small piece from the New York Times that kind of deals with the issue. What is our issue here? And what is the issue with traveling? And so this says, the glaciers are melting, the coral reefs are dying, Miami Beach is slowly going under. Quick, says the voice in your head. Go see them before they disappear. You are evil, says another voice. You are hastening their destruction. To a lot of people who like to travel, these are morally bewildering times. Something that seemed like a pure escape and adventure has become a double-edged, harmful, and epitome of selfish consumption. Going someplace far away, we know now, is the biggest single action a private citizen can take to worsen climate change. One seat on a flight from New York to Los Angeles effectively adds months worth of human generated carbon emissions into the atmosphere, and yet we fly more and more. The number of airline passengers worldwide has more than doubled since 2003, and unlike with some other pollution sources, there is not a ton that can be done right now to make flying significantly greener. Electrified jets have not come into an airport near you anytime soon. Still, we wonder, how much is one vacation really going to hurt anyone or anything? It is hard to think about climate change in relation to your own behavior. We are small, our effects are microscopically incremental, and we mean no harm. The effects of climate change are inconceivably enormous and awful, and for the most part still unrealized. You can't see the face of the unnamed future person whose coastal village you will have helped submerge. But it turns out that there are ways to quantify your impact on the planet, at least roughly. In 2016, 2 climatologists published a paper in a prestigious journal, in a prestigious science journal, showing the direct relationship between carbon emissions and the melting Arctic Sea. 32 square feet of the Arctic summer sea and ice cover, the number of square feet of an Arctic summer ice sea cover that one passenger's share of emissions melts on a 2,500 mile flight is 32 square feet. That is how much you are melting the ice caps by going on a 2,500 mile flight. Each additional metric ton of carbon dioxide or its equivalent, your share of the emissions on a cross-country flight one way from New York to Los Angeles shrinks the summer ice cover by 3 square meters or 32 square feet, says the authors. And so, as we know, this is a huge issue. Flying takes so much energy, and the article essentially is saying that it's really easy to say, oh, it's not my fault for doing this. What is one flight gonna do? I mean, I take probably up to 10, probably more plane flights a year. And to think that, you kind of have to come to terms with yourself and understand that you as a consumer and you as a passenger and you as a traveler are actually just yourself, hurting the environment by doing all these things. And, you know, like I said before, it's not like great, no one should ever travel again or fly, but we just have to be more careful when we are, you know, thinking about specifically when we were thinking about traveling and flying. Last episode, I did an episode where you could drive instead of fly. I did, you know, I've done work before that has made me feel enriched and enlightened. That's just around the corner. Doing things like going on road trips when you have a lot of people in the car with you is much more better for the environment than, say, each individual person taking up a seat on a plane. Now, like I said, although the article said that the plane industry is not an industry that is has the ability to be very environmentally conscious, I would love to see in the future us pushing much harder to make planes much more environmentally friendly, as they are, unfortunately, the best way to travel, the most efficient way to travel, and a lot of people need to travel on planes. And so I think that understanding that this is the problem at hand is going to really help us when we are talking about ways to be able to sustainably travel, and just kind of what we can do just with ourselves when we are traveling to kind of offset this. And that is what we're going to talk about after the break. We are going to talk about the best mode of transportation that you can take, and we're going to talk about a concept called carbon offsets. And I promise it is not at all a negative episode to kind of ease your mind, to ease my mind. We are going to talk after the break about all the things that you can be doing to really push yourself to travel in an environmentally friendly way, the best way you can, to give back. And just a reminder, it's just the little things that help. It can be so overwhelming when we're trying to, you know, fix our environmental problem that we have, but just taking just the smallest steps in the right direction, as we know, can help a big way. I mean, if buying a seat on a plane from New York to LA can be so detrimental, and it's just that one thing, think about all the small things that you can do in your life that can help, you know, reverse that you cannot be buying into that. And so we're going to talk about all of that after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Back from the break. Before the break, a bit of a more depressing segment. I talked about kind of all the issues that we have being contributors to the environment when we are traveling. I talked about the fact that we really do need to take ownership over our own actions and understand that we are not so small that we couldn't possibly be hurting the environment just by making our own decisions. And that so much of the little things that we can do can actually be quite detrimental to the environment. And unless we are able to take responsibility, we are able to think about each and every cent that we, pay and what we are putting our money towards, what we are allowing ourselves to do. We need to understand the environmental impacts that each decision we have. And I think that knowing that you're melting 32 square feet of an Arctic ice cap when you are taking a long plane flight. Just even knowing that is going to make us hold more responsibility. It is going to make us be more intentional with the travel that we do. And so moving on from that, we're going to go upwards from here. I'm going to talk about all of the things that you can do to sustainably travel. And the first thing that I need to mention, I briefly mentioned it before the break, I'm going to talk about the best modes of transportation. So, as we learned from the last segment in that article that I read, planes are the worst type of travel, or some of the worst types of travel that you can take. And we need to be very conscious about that. But another mode of transportation that is terrible for the environment, absolutely horrible, is ships, and in particular, cruise ships are very bad for the environment. In my research, essentially, I came across, some companies that are taking people out on giant ships to go see the melting ice caps, and what they're doing in return is just melting them so much faster, and they're going to show, these are the last polar bears that you'll ever be able to see, and by taking these people out on ships, they are extraordinarily aiding to that problem and making, those ice caps melt so much faster. And so, some facts to give you, even the most efficient cruise ships emit 3 to 4 times more carbon dioxide per passenger miles than a jet. And so although you might think that planes are the worst, cruise ships in general are terrible for the environment. These are things that we need to be avoiding in 2020 and for the rest of our lives. If you can possibly avoid going on big, huge ships, that includes cruise ships. I don't know what other type of vessel that you would choose to take. That is really, really hurting our environment. And so, avoid trains, avoid planes, definitely avoid cruise ships. Some other options, as I mentioned, driving, obviously. We know that transportation is, the biggest polluter, and so anything that uses petroleum is an issue. However, Driving a car, especially if you're carpooling, driving with multiple people is a much better option. That's why I recommended road trip. Like I said, you can check out the episode that I did last week about a specific road trip that you can take in California, but taking road trips in general are great. A lot of times I live in the Northeast and I travel to Florida quite often, and what I'll do is, pack a bunch of people in my car and we'll all take a road trip to Florida. This is a much better and more economic and also ecological way to travel. Other things that you can do, trains. A lot of new train technology is coming out to make trains much more sustainable. A lot of public transit in general is becoming much more sustainable, running on diesel, running on solar power, running on a bunch of different things to help kind of reduce that carbon footprint, especially in a place like a city. And so when you are also, I forgot to mention the best form of transportation, which is just walking. In my Europe podcast that I did, I mentioned that you should walk everywhere. This is something I strongly believe in. I live in a city now. You could not catch me driving my car if it's within a mile. I have a bike, which I love, and I love to walk everywhere. This is a way that you can stay fit. It is a way, it's therapeutic for me, spending time outside. Also in my last episode, I mentioned that if you take 5 minutes of time outdoors, it has proven facts to reduce anxiety. It makes you more calm. It helps with your physical and mental health. And so getting that time outside, walking when you can, is a great way of transportation, especially, so if you're going to buy a plane ticket into a city, which this is a travel podcast, this is what we do, this is what we want to do, then maybe, take that choice, make that opportunity, and decide to walk for the rest of the trip if that is at all possible to you. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a concept called carbon offsets. And I want to give this justice, and so I'm going to read part of an article about what carbon offsets are, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Carbon offsets do seem to offer the most direct way to assure travelers' guilt. In theory, they magically get rid of your sins. They give a broker some money, not a lot of money either. Carbon offsets can be bought for $10 per metric ton. They give it to someone to plant trees or capture the methane from the landfills or cattle operation or help build a wind farm or subsidize clean cook stoves for people in the developing world to cook on open fires. All of these things are going to help cut greenhouse gas. Now, that's the basic idea of what a carbon offset are. If you're interested in that, it's essentially, if you can afford a plane flight, you can afford to purchase some carbon offsets. You can help do some good. If you're traveling to a country, help plant trees, help do any little thing that you can to give back to the environment. And so these are great, but as we know, nothing is as simple in practice. So this is also from the article. Carbon offset people talk about concerns with things called additionally, leakage, and permanence. Additionally, how do you know the utility would not have built the wind farm, but from the money that you gave them? How do you know the timber company that planted those trees won't just cut them down in a few years? How do you know the landowner you just paid, did not just cut down an acre of rainforest and won't use the money to buy a different acre to clear that? When certifying organizations, make sure that you go to great lengths to verify carbon offset projects, and verification has limits. So this is a quote. It says, whether someone who would have planted trees anyway or taken some other action like building a housing development is ultimately unknowable and something you have to construct, said Peter Miller, a policy director of the National Resources Defense Council and a board member of the Climate Action Reserve, the country's biggest carbon offset registry. It's an endless debate. And so I just wanted to give you both sides of that. If you are interested in carbon offsets, it is, this is a quote that I say every single episode. I should probably get a t-shirt that says it. Just do your research. Make sure that you are investing in a reputable and, transparent carbon offset company or organization. see reviews, so on and so forth. But, carbon offsets are a great way to give back. Like I said, if you have enough money to buy a plane ticket, you have enough money to help with your own carbon offsets. And so that is just, one thing that we can do. When we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about the fashion industry and how it's detrimental and how it can even relate to the world and possibly traveling. And then we're going to end our show with just some classic sustainable travel tips that I am going to give you, and that is going to be when we come back from the break.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
From the break, before our commercial break, we talked about carbon offsets, we talked about the best modes of transportation, and we talked about how to lift yourself up in terms of sustainable travel and how it's not just all doomed. There is a way for you to make a difference. Consider, investing in carbon offsets, especially if you are going to go on a cruise or you're going to take a plane ride anywhere. Carbon offsets are a great way to almost clear your mind of, and maybe that's not the right mentality, I think that could be dangerous, but it's to feel like you are, although you might be damaging the world, you're also helping it in some regard. Okay. This particular segment that I want to talk about is going to be entirely from the heart. I have no notes on it. I have no fancy facts or particular information because this is something that I think I want to speak from the heart about. This is something that I've become so fueled and so partial to over the last just few months. It's really something that I think it's something that I feel like is in my hands and it's like within grasp for me to actually help and actually make a difference. And that's why I want to talk about on the show today. And I promise it's not completely off of a tangent. It does kind of go back to, around the world and the globe and kind of what we can do to help and what we shouldn't do. And so that, of course, is going to be the fashion industry. So I think it's important for me to give a bit of a background on fashion. You know, by this point, I talk about clothing in a lot of my episodes. I talk about what to wear, I talk about fashion, I talk about, functionality. All of these things are really important to me, and fashion has been a pillar of my childhood. It has been one of my favorite art forms to practice, and as an artist, it's something that I love to do. It's a family tradition of mine. It is a bonding exercise with my mother and my sister, and my grandmother had good fashion, her mom had good fashion. It really is a part of my family, I feel like. And like I said, number one thing that it is for me is artistic expression, and probably my favorite form of artistic expression. And so I think that because it was so important to me for so long, I never really blinked an eye in terms of concepts like fast fashion or sustainable fashion. I never really considered any of these things, and I just, bought clothes when I had the money to and when I wanted to, and what I have learned is that is extremely detrimental. The fashion industry is the, second biggest polluter in the world, and it's something that no one is talking about or not talking about enough. And so, basically, to give you, if I could, a quick overview of why it's so detrimental is because pretty much all of the fashion industry uses petroleum. And so a designer might design something, and then they need it to be manufactured. And the place where, the articles of clothing are, or rather the fabric is made, and then I might be driven to another place, another country, another continent to be, sewn together, and then it could be going to another continent to be dyed, which is so detrimental to the environment, and then it could be going to another, continent to get shipped. And so it's doing this massive transport, which obviously, as we know, is using so much resources, very bad for the environment. But the other issue is, in America and in most places, we've stopped using natural fibers and natural contents, meaning 100% organic cotton or silk, which comes from a worm, or wool or leather. These are things that we have stopped using, and we've started to use synthetic substitutes. And what synthetic materials are made out of is, if you could guess it, petroleum. And so, or other really harmful chemicals. And unlike silk or leather or wool or cashmere, synthetic materials don't biodegrade. They take an average of 2,000 years to biodegrade. And on top of all of this, on top of the issues of transportation, on top of the issues of unfair wages for workers, on top of the issue of non-biodegradable clothing, the fast fashion industry is producing clothes at such a fast rate that we throw away our clothes within 1 year. Most clothing has a 1 year lifespan, and because it's not made out of natural fibers, all of that is going essentially into the garbage and never being disposed of. And so the fast fashion industry has erupted in the past 20 years or so. There used to be in fashion 3 different seasons, so 3 times a year new cycles of clothes would come in. It is now up to every 2 weeks new sets of clothes come in to a store. And so if you can imagine, that production is insane. That is producing clothes at a too fast rate that no one could buy all of it. And because it is so sought after, people buy things so often, and they either never get rid of their clothes, they either throw them away, which is the worst thing you can do, or something that has not been effective, which I think people try to use as a effective measure, is giving their clothes away to somewhere like Goodwill or Salvation Army. And the issue there is that Goodwill and Salvation Army, although some of those clothes might be recycled and could be brought or could be bought by another person to continue to use that at a discounted rate, which in theory is amazing, so many of those clothes don't get bought, and then they go straight into the garbage, which, as we know, things don't biodegrade, things pile up, and now we just have a bunch of trash on the earth. Or what I want to talk about in terms of travel and in terms of looking at fast fashion on a global perspective, what has been happening and what has been extremely detrimental to the rest of the world, and something that should be considered when you are traveling, is companies like Goodwill or Salvation Army, or even companies like Marshalls or TJ Maxx. These companies are selling their clothes that are not bought abroad to countries at an extremely discounted rate. And because they're at an extremely discounted rate, people in those countries are buying them, and what it's doing is destroying the local economies of those places, because handmade items, which could be someone's livelihood and job, are no longer being bought because they're instead buying secondhand clothes from the United States. And so what countries have been doing is refusing those clothes in the past few years, because it has literally destroyed entire economies. And what happens when those clothes are refuted? Well, basically they end up exactly where all the other options have taken us, which is into the dump, never to be biodegraded, because nothing is made out of natural fibers anymore. And so, it's a huge issue, and an issue that just makes me so angry, and something that I want to spread and talk about so much more, and something that I never thought could reach a global issue or could have to do anything with travel, but understanding that local economies are important, and that when you are in a country, to buy from local economies and to buy homemade things and things that people in the country are making and going straight to them is so important. And so if you're wondering, okay, well, how do I get rid of my clothes? I'm in this issue right now. I have too many clothes. I've purchased too many clothes. That is something I'm going to stop doing. I am going to try to stop buying into fast fashion. So big brands like Forever 21, H&M are really big contributors to this. You want to look for a brand that is fair trade, and fair trade is essentially I would call it a criteria that you could possibly reach with your clothes if you're a certified fair trade. It's also for food. Look for companies that are fair trade. Look for companies that are transparent, because a lot of greenwashing is happening. And greenwashing, if you do not know, is essentially when a company screams the fact that they are, eco-friendly and that, they're made in America, or that, they're doing things environmentally friendly, but in reality, they're using six different shipping facilities in 3 different continents. And something that I learned recently is that you, as a company, do not have to reveal where you have made your clothes. The only requirement for you to have on your clothing on the tag, when it says, made in China or made in Taiwan or made in Indonesia, that's just the last place that the clothing came from. And so you could say made in America if the very last place that, if the zippers were put on to your bags in America, then your bag can say made in America, when really it was made in Taiwan and Belize and all of these other places. And so I could talk so much more about it. When we come back from the break, I'm going to tell you how you can be more sustainably fashionable, and that is going to fall right back into traveling, I swear. And we will wrap up the episode with some general ways to sustainably travel, so stay tuned.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And we are back from our break. Thank you for bearing with me on my fast fashion / environmentally unconsciousness of the fashion industry rant. I promise I'm almost done, but I want to, like I said, it's not all bad. I want to give you some ways that you can sustainably shop, that you can help yourself clean out your closet and become less wasteful while not buying into or not playing into throwing your clothes in the garbage. And so, as I mentioned before, giving your clothes just in trash bags to Goodwill isn't always the best option, as I kind of thought that it was before. And so, something that I just started just the other day was I started selling my clothes on the internet to go secondhand to other people. If you don't want to, sell your clothes, try giving them away to friends. But what I did is I set up my own Instagram account. I linked it to my, original account. I threw up pictures of the clothes that I didn't want anymore, and I have been trying to either give them away to people that I know or have people buy them. Other sites you can do this on more officially are things like Poshmark or Depop, even like eBay and anything like that. If you can sell your clothing or get rid of your clothing in a way that someone else is absolutely going to wear them and it's not just going to go straight into her garbage, is the most sustainable way to do that. I mean, you have to take everything with a grain of salt with that, but that generally is the best way you can do that. Now that you know how to do that, something that you should do, and what I am doing, is clean out your closet. If you're like me, I have so many clothes that I do not need. Do some serious cleansing of your closet. Get rid of your clothes sustainably, and that is going to make room for you to start to buy from sustainable brands. And it's going to start, if you can buy fair trade products. And now, like I said, greenwashing is a huge thing. Do not let companies fool you into thinking that they are a sustainable brand if they are not transparent. Transparency, no one has to be transparent in the fashion industry. I think that we need some laws around this, but try to do your research, and if you don't know where your clothes are coming from, you shouldn't buy from that company. Pretty much one of the only companies that actually does this is Patagonia. They're an amazing company, but they're also very expensive, and not everyone can afford Patagonia. And so look for fair trade clothes, look for Patagonia clothes, and if you can't do any of that, if you don't have a lot of money to spend, buy natural clothes. So cotton is natural, but it has to be organic cotton. Cotton is natural. Cashmere is natural. Silk is natural. Alpaca fur, different types of wool, leather, which I just like to touch really quickly. A lot of people do not like leather or suede because they're animal products and would rather side with a false leather, or what's the word I'm looking for? Basically a fake leather. But if you would like to guess what you think, fake leather is made out of, it's made exactly out of plastic, and it'll never biodegrade. The best thing you can do for the environment is to buy leather and to buy suede. And I used to work for a company that sold leather items, and most leather companies use excess materials from butchers. So they're not killing animals, they're actually, taking a resource that would otherwise go to waste, and they're actually using it. And so buying leather, contrary to what you might think, is actually the most sustainable thing you can do. Don't buy fake leather. Either don't wear leather or wear genuine leather. Anyway, and so look for those companies that are actually sustainable. Look for that fair trade. Look for transparency. You want to know where your, clothes are coming from. Another tidbit I'd like to just mention and plug, and this is something that I am trying to work on myself, but indigo dye, which is used for all jeans, is the absolute worst chemical in the fashion industry, and it has been a true destroyer of a lot of natural water wells in different countries. It has it's literally killed people just so that we can wear jeans. And I encourage you to do more research on it if you want. I don't have time to go too much into it, but jeans can be a really big problem in terms of being detrimental to the earth, to people's health, so on and so forth. And so look for natural items, look for fair trade items, look for things that are not made out of synthetic fabrics that are never going to biodegrade. That would be my best advice to give you. We're going to take another break, and then when we come back, we're going to have our last segment. I'm going to give you, just to end off our show, some great ways that you can stay sustainable. So make sure you stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Break just in time for our very last segment. this show has been a lot of me ranting. It's been a lot of me talking about our environmental issues. Starting from the top of the show, we talked about my journey of sustainability, how different organizations and different industries are detrimental to the environment. We talked about energy, transportation, fashion industry, residential, commercial, institutional, agriculture, forestry, and land management. We talked about the issues of traveling and having to kind of grapple with wanting to travel and see the world, and also how that in itself is detrimental. We talked about the best modes of transportation. Try to walk everywhere you can. If you're traveling, try to travel in a car. We talked about carbon offsets. We talked about a little bit about sustainable travel. We talked about the fashion industry, how to be as sustainably how to be as sustainable as possible when you are purchasing clothes. Make sure you're looking for that fair trade. Make sure you are trying to understand how transparent companies are, so on and so forth. And so to wrap up the show, I am not by any means, I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to lecture anyone. I am as bad as anyone else when it comes to all of these things. I just think it's important to talk about this because as travelers, as people who love to travel and see the world and see all the natural beauties of the world, we need to understand how we are hurting the world and how by traveling and seeing these beauties we are actually kind of diminishing them, as the years go on. But however, having all of that said, I'm not telling you to stop traveling. I will not stop traveling. I just think that we can all be thinking about how to do it in a more conscious way. And so that is what I want to talk to you about for the end of this episode. So, some ways that we can be more conscious when we're traveling, as I mentioned, paying attention to how we get to the places we're going. So if it's possible to take any other transportation other than a giant boat or a plane, consider doing that. When you're in, let's say you're in country, let's say you've traveled to another continent, another country, try and be conscious about your own transportation. Try to walk everywhere. Try to bike, so on and so forth. And you can do this in your life at home as well. But just pay attention to these things. Another thing I want to talk about is pay attention and take issue with different places that you are staying in. Look to stay in an eco lodge. Look to, look into camping options. Look into what hotels, hostels, Airbnbs you're staying at. Are they sustainable? Do they have recycling? How much, greenhouse gases are they emitting? Things like this can really go a long way. When you're packing to go traveling, invest in your clothes. That is, my biggest piece of advice I can give you. That is the journey that I'm on right now. I can't think about the money that I've wasted on clothing that breaks in a month but will never biodegrade, and I probably have bought, if you think about if a shirt, costs $10 instead of $100, well, how many $10 shirts do I buy in a year when really I only need one $100 shirt? If that makes any sense to you. And so when you're packing, when you're buying your equipment, when you are buying backpacks and suitcases, making the investment to make sure your zippers don't break so you're not throwing away, a 3-foot pound of plastic, where does a suitcase go once it's broken? Can you repair it? Look into, for example, Patagonia will repair any item that ever breaks. And so buying a Patagonia, backpack, although it might be twice as expensive as a North Face backpack, it is 100% sustainably made. You can count on that. And if it ever, breaks or rips or gets damaged in any way, they will repair it to you for free in store. And I think that that is pretty amazing. And so, consider buying a Patagonia backpack over a Nike backpack. That is one of the worst companies in terms of environmentally damaging the world, and it's going to break after a year, and you're going to have to buy another one. So making those little changes in the equipment that you use and the clothing that you're wearing when you're traveling And then, of course, try to do some give back if it's even possible. Try to, in a lot of other countries, there's no central trash system, right? There's no recycling. There's no implements to be sustainable. And although the U.S. is a massive polluter because of the big industries we have, other countries, small scale, have issues with the environment, as opposed to in the U.S. we have big scale issues. And so when I spent time in the Pacific Islands and in Indonesia, there was just trash everywhere because no one had a trash can. People were burning their trash, which is terrible for the environment, or literally throwing it directly into the ocean. And so some of the work that I did while I was in Indonesia was, building up the tree line. It was building and planting mangrove trees. It was doing trash pickups. Little things like this, when you're going in country, can go obviously a really long way. And so those are just kind of the things to be considering and thinking about. When you're planning a trip, if you have to buy a plane ticket, what are you going to do to give back? How are you going to balance out the fact that you essentially are melting 32, square feet of an ice cap when you do so, which is really heavy, but I think it's really important to talk about. And if we are going to travel, we have to be honest with ourselves and understand what we are doing as travelers and how we can be detrimental by doing this. Again, I will be traveling for the rest of my life. Never stop traveling because of this. Just be cautious and be thinking about the environment the next time you buy a plane ticket, the next time you buy a shirt from Forever 21, the next time you are needing new equipment and considering what brands to use. Try to buy, fair trade coffee, bring a reusable mug, bring a reusable straw. I didn't even talk about any of that stuff, but when you're traveling, bring a water bottle, because like I said, if you're buying plastic water bottles in a country because you can't drink the water there, and then you're throwing that water bottle away, that water bottle will go, either will be burned, will be put in the ocean, or will be put on the ground in a lot of different places because there is no way to dispose of trash. Bring a reusable water bottle, a reusable straw, reusable coffee cups, things like this can really go a long way when you're traveling. They can really go a long way in your everyday life. Those are just some of my rules. This was a sustainability episode. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you have more things to say, please DM us on Twitter. It is always a big help to us when you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. If you can, subscribe. If you can write a nice comment about our show, about our episode, about GSMC podcasts in general. That is so kind and really does help us. I hope everyone has a wonderful and a safe night, and we will see you on the next podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.